Here on the Country Viewpoint program, great to be chatting again with agricultural analyst at Pro Farmer Grain, Sean Hickey. Sean, how are you today?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks, Ricky.
Pretty wet time of it, whether it's flooding or just rainfall at the wrong time of season for grain growers and canola growers. Just how is it looking across the board from a market point of view for you?
Yeah, we've obviously seen the heavy rainfall across New South Wales and Victoria last week, which has seen some pretty heavy flooding and obviously impacts on quality as well. We're kind of estimating around 50 to 60,000 hectares have been abandoned in New South Wales as a result, and then around 25,000 hectares abandoned in Victoria, so that's around 1% of that planted area, but still significant. We anticipate there'll also be some yield reductions in those waterlogged crops as well, though hopefully in the better drained areas across New South Wales and Victoria, we may actually see an increase in yields, which might help kind of make up some of that production shortfall. I suppose in terms of quality, it is still too early to understand the full extent of downgrading, and that won't really be known until crops are in the bin, but pulses appear to be the worst impacted at the moment. And obviously we are seeing in terms of pricing, we're seeing some of those quality concerns impact the spread between milling and feed quality wheat. So that's now kind of spread to over $100 a tonne, which is pretty significant. We've also actually seen harvest push back further, so that's kind of 2 to 3 weeks behind schedule at the moment across southern New South Wales and Victoria, given the cold weather, and then more rainfall anticipated over the weekend and early next week, which we're all kind of eagerly trying to see what that will do to crops as well, unfortunately. So, that's kind of where we stand with the wet weather on the East Coast, but there's also obviously some impacts to supply chains and logistics, which are impacting growers as well.
Well, I notice usually people just talk about the 2022 harvest, but especially in these last couple of La Nina years, they're now talking about it as the 22-23 harvest. Looks like some will be harvesting again if they can manage to get in there in parts of New South Wales well past Christmas.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, we're kind of 3 weeks behind schedule now. If we get kind of some heavier than anticipated rainfall next week, it might push it out even further. Good chance of harvest kind of spreading into the early weeks of the new year, unfortunately.
And I guess does that open up the possibility there might be differentials across our broadcast state, South Australia, right across to New South Wales? In the South Australian context, not as exposed, nowhere near as exposed in terms of flooding, and even not necessarily that much rainfall. Some barley starting to arrive at Viterra silos in recent weeks.
Yeah, that's right. South Australia has kind of gone the exact opposite way to what we've seen in New South Wales and Victoria. South Australian production is looking really strong. So Australian crop forecasters actually recently increased their production estimates for the state, and that follows pretty perfectly timed rainfall that they received over the last kind of 2 to 3 weeks. And there's potentially a record-breaking crop anticipated across the state, which is great for South Australian growers, obviously. Harvest is I suppose slowly getting underway. I think there is some rainfall on the horizon for most of South Australia over the next kind of 4 or 5 days, and that's likely to obviously put the brakes on harvest for the time being. But yeah, things looking really strong in the state. Pricing has held up relatively well too, which is really good. We're kind of seeing wheat hovering around that kind of $440 to $455 a tonne mark at Port Adelaide. That's APW grade wheat, and obviously holding up a little better than what we're seeing with feed grade wheat, given what's happening on the East Coast. Barley kind of hovering around that $330, $335, and canola back nearing $800 a tonne, which was kind of last seen in late. And again, the softer Aussie dollar is obviously kind of helping to support the South Australian market pretty well, given that it is a bit of an export hotspot.
It sure is, and we almost got through our regular chats about grains and canola without talking about the overseas situation in Ukraine, but are there any other major international factors apart from the dollar worth mentioning this week?
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. I suppose late last week, the USDA actually released their updated global production estimates. They do that in their World Agriculture Supply and Demand Estimates report. And so we actually saw world wheat and world corn production forecasts for 2022-2023 cut, which did flow through and have a little bit of an impact on global futures markets for those commodities. And we actually saw global oilseed output revised higher, and that was on the back of increased EU production. So that was kind of one that did have an impact on global markets. We've also seen global grain prices kind of supported by the news that the grain exports via that Black Sea export corridor out of Ukraine not being guaranteed past November. So, that has also proved supportive for global grain prices. And then I suppose in terms of global harvest, we've also seen kind of corn and soybean harvest advancing quite quickly throughout the US. They've had some pretty dry weather, and that's also the case in Canada, which is also progressing really well thanks to some favourable weather.
All right, great wrap across the globe. Thanks very much, Sean Hickey, agricultural analyst at Pro Farmer Australia. If people want to hear more from you or get in touch, what's the website to look up?
Just jump on to www.profarmergrain.com.au, and that'll give you a rundown of everything that's happening in domestic grain markets.